start recording. There we go. Okay. So now that we're recording, let's actually build some stuff. Now, a couple of things I like to do. Remember, also, guys, remember there's a quiz today. It is how do you do camera move, right? Camera move. Just like yesterday's was camera rotate. Remember yesterday's quiz, you can still take it today, is how do you do camera rotate? That's alt left mouse button because we're using industry compatible. Today's quick quiz, because we're not doing enough yet to get a progress check, we'll do that next week, is how do you camera move, right? And that's alt middle mouse button, right? Alt middle mouse button. Remember to mark the participation checkbox as well. It's always good because one of the questions and answers is just one answer, and it's a participation point, right? So remember that. We'll talk about more again later on, but there is a mini quiz today. There's always some small little assignment, either a mini quiz or a progress check. All right. So here we're in Blender, and of course, you just edit preferences. If you forget to do it at the beginning when you first launch it, most of you guys are already set up. But if you're still setting up Blender for the first time, it'll give you an option, something like this, on the first splash screen. But if you forget, you can just go Edit, Preferences, Key Map, and then you just go right up here to pick Industry Compatible. That way you're using all the same quick keys we are. And Alt Left rotates your camera, Alt Middle moves your camera. That's your scroll wheel. Remember, you can press down as a button. And Alt Right mouse button zooms. And in fact, that's really going to be our first mini quizzes. Is just those, just to kind of remind Dante and kind of help, Paulina get their stuff going down. Learn that stuff. So yeah, I also like to switch to the modeling layout. Remember, we have our layouts up here that give us kind of focused interfaces. So I like to click on modeling. That way it gives me some modeling tools here, and you get these guys right up here. Notice how they kind of change around a little bit depending on what interface it is. So take advantage of these. It's really great, right? I also don't like my camera and my light visible. So remember, you can go right up to outliner here, and there's your camera eyeball, and there's your light eyeball. And you just kind of click those eyeballs off, and then you won't see them visible in the viewport anymore. At this point, I don't really want this here. So remember, 4 is object mode, right? So you can just kind of go to object mode. The object's already selected, so it's got that orange outline, so you can just hit delete. It gets rid of it. And at this point, what we want to do is we want to make our kind of tire and wheels for this car, right? Because we're going to use the extrude and bridge border edge method, right? There's kind of a couple methods. You could either start with a box and try to use your knife tool to cut shapes into it, right? You could either sculpt it a bunch and then retopo it. Some people will actually use complicated spline networks to create several patches of the car and sew them together, which I hate. I think that's one of the slowest, clumsiest methods to get there. It still works. It's still a correct way to get there, but it's way more time consuming than it needs to be. I'm an advocate of the method I'm going to be showing you guys, which is the extrude bridge border edge method, right? It allows you to kind of build in the patches and kind of build the edge loop flows to follow the contours of the surface, which we're going to talk a lot more about on this car than we've talked about on previous projects. This one in particular, the complicated quadric we do for our final turn project, we're going to deal with more complicated edge loop structures, right? So we're going to get to talk about that more here. And it still gives us the benefit of being able to kind of define that panel to have the shape we want, but it has all the speed, real-time feedback, and flexibility of polygon modeling methods. So I love this method. It's a great method to build cars and spaceships. Many of you guys remember the spaceship from last year. This is just a version of that, using a lot of the same techniques and methods. So of course, I'm in object mode here, right? Remember they're right up here, that little pull down for those, but 4 is the quick key for it when you're using industry compatible. And I just deleted that cube, right? Delete on your keyboard. And then of course we go to add, right? Now of course that's where the reference images is if you want to load those in and use reference images. But I just want to create a mesh, right? At the very top, the add menu here, mesh, and I want to create a cylinder, right? A cylinder, because a cylinder is the shape of a wheel, or even partially the kind of the wheel well, right? That kind of little cover on your fender that goes over your wheel, right? So I'm going to click cylinder. Now you see it drops the default cylinder in, and I haven't clicked anywhere else. When you let go, it just makes that cylinder there. So you don't click anywhere else. What you do is you go down to here, right? Because right now the add cylinder is still active, and the properties of that add cylinder are right here. Technically, you can kind of get them from here as well, but I just kind of like this one. So right down here at the bottom, you just can click on the add cylinder. Just click on it, and it opens it up. And remember, you can rotate it, and we want it to be rotated along the green or the y-axis. Remember, this is your Cartesian space, x, y, and z. Grid units, positive, negative. So this is the kind of grid that you'd expect to find in a geometry or trigonometry class, except we don't have to actually do math necessarily for a lot of this stuff. But it is using that same Cartesian coordinate system, x, y, z. We have z, of course, because it's 3 dimensions. So I'm going to rotate 90. Right, 90 degrees on the y, so it's on its side. I also don't want it to be 32 sides, right? That's what that vertice number controls, 32 sides. I want this to be a simpler shape. So I'm going to go to here and tell that to be like 12. I want enough so that I have enough to kind of extrude some shapes off. Actually, I might even go 14, I think. But I don't want too much, right? So we'll hit 14, and you see that kind of simplifies it a bit. And then I can close that down, and I can click off of it, and you'll see that that no longer is available, right? So at this point, we can actually easily have this as a tire object if we want to, right? Makes it pretty easy for us to have that tire object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit R for scale, right? Remember, using industry compatible, you use my navigation, Alt left, Alt middle, Alt right, but also W, E, R for your move, rotate, scales. Although you'll see the right here, right? Move, rotate, scale. So some of this I'm repeating for our 2 new students. But you know, guys, it never hurts to have that reinforced, right? And I want to make it a little thinner this way. So remember, I can grab the actual handles, right? Remember, this is your scale tool, R for scale. And this red handle, right, will only scale along the x-axis. So if I just left-click drag on this one, see how it scales just along that axis? Just like if I was to grab that one or that one. You can even scale along 2 axes at a time if you want to by grabbing those little squares. So particularly industry compatible really gives you a lot of the default Maya functionality, which Maya totally nailed and got right. And that's one of the reasons why I love industry compatible in the way it's set up in Blender now and the overall interface. So that gives us kind of a little bit more of the thinness of the tire that we wanted to have, right? Now I'm going to hit W so I can move this out, W for move. I can just grab the red arrow, right, just move along the X. And I'll probably leave this as the center of the car, so I'll move it on the green as well, right? It doesn't have to stay exactly on that. You can move it up or down. You'll see you have these squares which do the same thing that they do on the scale tool. It'll move just along these 2 axes. So whatever kind of square it is, that's kind of that plane it'll move along, but only 2 axes. All right, so kind of get the wheel there. Now in this case, what we're going to do this time around is I'm going to add a modifier quickly to this tire. All right, so remember, we've got the blue wrench right here. So remember, kind of this is your outliner. It's basically all your objects in your scene, including cameras and lights. But right down here is your properties menus, basically. And there's a lot of different properties options here, right? The blue wrench is your modifier menu, right? And you're not going to use that all the time, but there's some important modifiers in there. So I'm going to go to Add Modifier, and I'm first going to use Mirror, all right? Now in this case, I want to mirror it along the Z-axis. What's going on? Why are you not mirroring? Okay, let me close that down. What's going on there? That's... Oh, my bad. My bad. I'm going to undo. This is actually a good learning lesson for you guys. I sometimes forget it. When I moved this at the object level, it actually moves the center, right? So you see that little kind of orange dot right there? And I know this about Blender, I just forgot. And I occasionally do that. That little orange dot is the center of your object. Here's the thing. You don't have to just move your object. In fact, I often like to not move the objects. So if I hit 3 for face mode, you'll notice it actually converts your object into a full face selection, right? If it doesn't, you can always go to select all or select a face, select linked. But in this case, I now can hit W for move it out, and you notice if that orange dot stays there. It's actually a great learning lesson for you guys. I've talked about it before, but it never hurts to see it again and again. Now that orange dot stays on the center of the world, right? The origin, the 0, 0, 0. And that's important for things like your mirror modifier to work correctly. So that's kind of one of the dangers of moving the whole object if you want to use some things like your mirror modifiers. So in this case, just kind of getting that out there for that tire. Now if I go to 4 for object mode and I go to add modifier, remember it's just the blue wrench, add modifier, and mirror. you'll notice when I pick the Z-axis, it works properly. Now in this case, I don't want to mirror along the X. I'm going to turn that off. I only want to mirror along the Z, right? Because that's the axis we want to mirror it along. It technically should be the X-axis, but you saw that it wasn't working, so sometimes just ignore that. That's not always going to matter perfectly, partially because we rotated this 90 degrees, right? So you kind of just switch to the one that works, right? I also usually like to have these little triangles on wherever it's at, right? If you're using Blender 2.9, it's right there, and it just shows the full editable effect through the whole thing. But now we have that mirror, which is great. I also want to go to Add Modifier, and I want to add Subdivision Surface, right? And what that does is that rounds that shape off a bit for us. It's a little bit weird right now, but as we model it more, it'll look nicer. But I also want to make sure that, say, when I go to 3 for face mode, you see how it kind of shows the control cage off the surface? That's annoying. That defeats the whole purpose of having the Subdivision Surface modifier on. So we turn the triangle on for that, and you notice how it kind of lets you select right on the surface itself instead of the larger control cage off the surface. Because that's what a subdivisional surface is really doing, is it's kind of virtually subdividing the mesh, so there's more quads there, but you're still only editing the low-res version. Now you'll also notice we're getting this shading going on here, right? This faceting effect. So I'm going to go to 4 for object mode. And remember, you can right-click. Right-click in Blender will bring up the context menus, in this case for the object level. And at the very top is Shade Smooth. That will actually smooth shade this model so that all the normal directions blend to make the shading look nice and kind of unified, right? Okay, so that gives us more and more of the wheel. Now in this case, what I want to do is I want to make this a little bit more properly rounded. So I'm going to go to, say, 3 for face mode. Remember, 1 is vertex, 2 is edges, 3 is face, they're right here. But technically 1 takes you into edit mode. And you see how there are all those modes right there. And what I could do is I could add an edge loop down the center here. Now remember, that's right here, loop cut, but it is also Alt-C. Alt-C is the quick key for that. So I'm going to hit Alt-C. And you'll see that it gives you a little preview of your edge loop, and we're just going to add it in. Remember, an edge loop is really exactly that. It's a loop of edges, right? They go kind of from one edge to an opposite edge. That's why we like quads quite a bit. Remember, quads are really important. So some of this I'm repeating for you guys a little bit because we have a couple of new students that have never done this or need a refresher. And guys, it never hurts for you guys to get refreshers on this too. Even though occasionally n-gons and triangles are not going to kill you and it's okay to use them, we really, as modelers, prefer to work with quads most of the time on most models because they are just overall work the best, are the most predictable in many important ways. And one of those ways is adding loop cuts in a predictable manner. Right? In this case, I want it right in the middle, and by default, it's set to do that, right? If you just left-click it, put it right in the middle. You would have to left-click drag to slide it in there, right? And you'll notice because I have that mirror modifier on, it's doing it on the other side. That's what's so cool about that mirror modifier, right? In this case, I actually kind of liked it just in the center because I'm going to do some stuff here in a minute that's going to help with this. But right here, remember loop cut, Alt-C is the quick key for it, and you can add a loop. Now remember, if you hit Q, right, Q is your quick key for your selection tool. If you double left click on an edge, right, so 2 for edge mode, if I double left click on an edge, it selects the edge loop, right? If you go to 3 for face mode, and you kind of click on an edge in between 2 faces, you double left click like that, it selects a face loop, right? So it's the same double left click. It's just if it's on an edge, it selects an edge loop. If it's kind of right between 2 faces, right, it doesn't have to be exactly on the edge, but it should be close to it to let it know, because if you do it in the center, it can kind of, depending on which direction you go, kind of biases it. Once you understand that, face loop selection is super awesome and easy in Blender, particularly in the industry compatible mode. So remember that stuff. In this case, I want to be in face mode. 3 for faces. I'm going to click on this face, and then remember, Shift adds selections, right? So if I hold down Shift, I can left click on the other side, and it selects both sides. Remember, there is an Inset Faces tool in Blender. I is the quick key for it. But it is right here. Just like loop cuts right there. Inset Faces. Now remember, many tools will come with this little yellow handle. That is fine to use. If you left click drag on that, it will interactively control this. And what Inset does is, remember, it creates new geometry. So it's kind of like an extrusion, but instead of moving it out, it scales it in, right? but it does create new quads right here, just like the extrude tool does. It's just that it scales it inward, keeping these shapes all coplanar, right? So inset's quite useful, quite cool. Remember, if you just middle mouse click, though, it will do it again. So you don't even have to grab on that yellow handle. If you just middle mouse click, it automatically does that. See, a middle mouse click automatically does it. And that's what I love using. I love using middle mouse click. And that's actually true of like the extrude, bevel. You have the handles, but you can actually just middle mouse click to kind of do the primary function for it, which when you get used to that's super cool about Blender. And I know a lot of you guys know this, but reinforcement, right? Practice. You guys did have a couple weeks off. All right. So in this case, that gives us something good to work with. Now, in this case, I feel like I should extrude these in a little bit. So I could use the extrude tool right here. But remember, if you right-click, right, when I right-click in face mode, because right, we're in 3 for face selection mode, if I right-click, you'll notice it brings up the face context menu. Now, a few of these are add-ons. I'll talk to you guys about that later on again, just to remind you guys how to turn those on. We don't need them right now, though. But you see there's the extrude features, insets right there, bridge faces is right there, shade smooth if you need to do that shade smooth on just certain faces. So there's some great tools in here. If you don't have quickies for certain tools, just right-click, and it'll bring up what you can use on the face menu most of the time. I want to extrude faces along the normal directions. Remember, that's really just the direction the face is pointing, right? So if I right-click and extrude the face along normal direction, you see how it'll kind of push them both inwards? See how both sides kind of, this one went in and this one went in, and it created new geometry there. So I want to do that a little bit. And then I'm just going to hit delete. Remember, when you hit delete on your keyboard, right? On your keyboard, it brings up the delete menu. And I want to delete faces just to kind of give us, you said it gives us kind of a basic tire shape, right? So that's kind of neat. I want to make sure you guys got to see that. Now what we need to do is we need to make that wheel well, right? So I'm going to make sure we're in face mode, which is 3, right? And I'm going to go Q for my selection tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this face. And then I'm going to shift click on this face over here, right? So left click on that face. Remember, left click is selecting, particularly when you use industry compatible. Hold down shift, select that face. Now because they're a shorter path, you can actually go to the select menu, and you'll notice that there is, in the select linked area, select linked is your right bracket key, there is a shortest path option, right? Now here's the thing. Remember, and a lot of you guys know this, I'm just kind of doing this for the benefit of my newer students. If you right click on the tool, you can then go down to assign shortcut. And then I could say, hey, let's use X. And now you see how that quick key is set to X. That's how easy it is to set quick keys, right? Really, really cool. Any tool, you just select it, right click on it, you can assign shortcut. So now you see if I hit X, it selects the shortest path. So it'll select just kind of a path in between those two faces. And this works for edge loops as well. And what I can do is I can copy these off into their own faces. Now, how do you do that? Well, if you go into Mesh menu, you'll see there is something Control-D, duplicate. There is a quickie already for that, though, Control-D. So I'm going to hit Control-D. And you can actually move it if you want to, but in this case, I just wanted to create it where I wanted to, but it is in the Mesh menu. Duplicate, Control-D. I'll just click to kind of duplicate it there. And now you'll see that is its own object. If I do that right bracket for select linked, you'll notice even though they're all still part of one object, those polygons are not connected to each other. So you'll notice I can hit, I can just select the face and then right bracket for select linked, right? That's in the select menu, select linked, it's the right bracket. And I can hit R for scale. Now, remember, if you grab on the outside one here, you'll see that it does a uniform scale. But that's also your middle mouse button. So you notice you can kind of make this bigger a bit if you want to and move it up a little bit to kind of be your wheel well shape. Right? So it'll kind of be the wheel well starting point. But you'll notice because I copied just those faces, even though they're one object, they're not touching each other polygonally. So you see how you can actually kind of get your tire started, but then also basically get your wheel well started. Now in this case, I'm going to hit 2 for edges, So I can select this edge and then shift left click this edge. And remember, you can do Control E for extrude. Although in this case, if you wanted to, you could just right click. Actually, I'm not seeing the extrude along normal edge there, but that's okay. But you can hit Control E for extrude, and then I'll just middle mouse click just to make it extrude. Then I can switch to W for my regular move tool, move it down along the blue. And you'll see how you can actually kind of create the basic kind of wheel well shape that you want. Now in this case, remember, if you want to save this, we go File, Control S is the save for it. And what I can do is I can save this on the desktop. We'll just call this car. There we go. And now I have the car Blender file created. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to quickly copy these. So I'm going to go to 3 for face mode. Control A again to select everything. And of course I can hit Control D for duplicate. Now I'm going to click right on top. So I just click so it creates them right on top. W for my move tool. And I can grab by the green arrow and you see I can move these over. And now you'll see that what we have is the starting point of not only our wheels, right? But we actually have the wheel well also. But you notice this wheel well already has this kind of nice, perfect kind of arch shape to it because it's based off of a cylinder, right? Now at this point, I could always select this edge, go to 2 for edge mode, and then shift click that one, so shift left click, so I've got those both selected. And if I right click, you'll notice there's a bridge edge loops, which will actually create a bridge between those. Remember, a bridge, it creates a new polygon in between the selections. Now it's a little bit kind of pulled here, so I'll hit Alt-C for loop cut, right? Then you just left-click drag to kind of put a loop there, and then a loop there, and one right about there. And you see how if I just put a few loop cuts in, you see how you've kind of already got the bottom connected? I could even put a loop in there really quick just to kind of sharpen that shape up. And you could start to see how we could build this car out. Now I might actually even delete some of these later on to rebuild this in a more interesting and dynamic way. But like I said, this is really much more about getting us started up. Now, if you wanted to, so I'm going to 3 for face mode, Q for selection. If you wanted to get these wheels to be their own separate object, select a face on each wheel, right bracket for select linked, right? So select menu, select linked. And if you right click again, remember right click brings up the context menus for that selection type. So I'm going a little bit longer than 9:30 here just to kind of give you enough to work from with this video. And you'll see down here at the bottom is something called separate selection. And what that does is if I go to 4 for object mode, you'll see there's now 2 objects, the body and the wheels as a separate object. All right, so that's, I think, going to be a great place to stop.